Okay, and a quick overview of our agenda here. Going to do an overview of kind of our drought processes and just going to set the scene for passing it off to our presenters. We will have Karen and Nick from the Washington office, the Office of the Washington State Climatologist, and then Matt Warburton from the National Resource Conservation Service. And stepping in today for Nick from USGS, we have Andy Long. Thank you, Andy. And then stepping in from Amy Burke from the Northwest River Forecast Center, we have Robin Fox. Thank you, Robin. And as well as Chris Lynch from Borough Reclamation. And then again, we will take a short 5-minute break after the presentations and then jump into our discussion. And again, we'll be coming back around to all of our presenters and committee members on this question of, has the hydrologic threshold for drought conditions been met or is forecasted to be met for additional geographic areas? And I'll talk briefly again about what we actually mean by that. And so again, here we appreciate WASAC providing this important advisory role to ecology on current and forecasted water supply conditions and whether that drought threshold has been or is likely to be met. And again, for today, we're going to be looking at water supply conditions and this question around the hydrologic threshold for drought conditions. And I'm just going to jump into what we mean by that. I think everyone here is pretty familiar, but just in case you're not, the hydrologic threshold is saying that an area is receiving or is projected to receive less than 75% of a normal water supply. And in terms of drought conditions, there's also a hardship threshold, but there's a separate committee that looks at that and additional steps in ecology's drought declaration process if we are to expand the existing drought declaration. But there is the high potential that coming out of today's meeting that we would be going through those additional steps in ecology's drought declaration process to potentially look at expanding and extending our existing drought declaration. And again, quick recap, our existing drought declaration covers these different areas shown on this map. And again, last July, ecology did declare drought in 12 watersheds in parts of 12 counties. And again, this is in effect through June of this year, but there's the high likelihood we'll be looking at expanding and potentially extending these areas. And I'll put a link into the chat here for this in a moment here. I just kind of wanted to set the scene here as well before jumping into our first presentation from Karen and Nick. And that with current deficits, there's a lot of concern that even if we had some sort of a miracle this spring, which again, we are already now into spring officially, that many basins would still be in a deficit for snowpack. And we're already seeing stream flow drop below normal and parts of the state. I know Andy's going to talk more about that. And with upcoming forecasts, there is a lot of concern for snowpack of having additional early melt we've already been seeing in some basins. And I know these past 2 sunny weekends may have been fun for folks, but if you're someone like the folks here who think about these snowpack issues all the time, it's kind of hard to enjoy going hiking in the Olympics when there's not snowpack where you'd expect to be seeing snowpack. And then Monday morning, yes, these last 2 weekends did have impacts and already caused reductions in the existing snowpack, particularly for places like the Olympics. And as we all know, that snowpack is a really big deal for a lot of watersheds in Washington, as that snowpack is a way that we naturally store and hold on to water for it to ideally gradually melt throughout spring and summer. But then we have this precipitation coming as rain instead of snow or melting off too early with these warmer temperatures. That really impacts when water is available for fish and people and irrigators and when that's more needed throughout later in spring and summer. And then this is my last slide I'm going to show before handing it off to Karen and Nick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but this is a quick look at different basins across the state. And the orange shows based on current forecasts as of Monday, what basins would be below that 75% hydrologic threshold for April through September of this year. And just the takeaway here is that we've got a number of basins that would continue at some point in these months to be below that 75% hydrologic threshold. And we've got a number of different concerns, as much as there are different angles to be looking at this data. And so with that, I'm gonna stop my screen share and we are gonna pass it off over to Karen and Nick. And Danielle, are you in a place to step in with screen share? And if not, I can just do their screen share as well.
All right, my name's Karen Bombacco. I'm with the Office of the Washington State Climatologist. Nick Bond is with me, and we'll be splitting this presentation like usual. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So this is taking a look at our water year-to-date temperature anomalies and the precipitation percent of normal. This is going through just March 24th and going back to October 1st. So we can see overall we've been on the warm side, anywhere from 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for temperatures for the water year. If you average just October through February, because of course we don't have our March numbers completely in yet, the October to February temperature is tied with 1940 as the 10th warmest on record. Those records go back to 1895. For precipitation, the kind of those white areas are close to near normal, but what is more apparent, or what I want to draw your attention to more on this map, are these brown areas where that's below normal precipitation throughout the northern and central Cascades, especially over in the Olympics. So really for the fall and winter as a whole, it's been slightly on the dry side. That doesn't meet really the criteria of less than 75% of normal precipitation, but of course we're going to hear from Matt about how bad our snowpack is. So that's the criteria that I would recommend focusing on for looking at drought. But anyway, so average statewide October to February was about 90% of normal for the whole state. Go ahead to the next slide, please. This is just looking at February and really back to those above normal temperatures after that brief couple week period of real cold temperatures in January, especially in Eastern Washington, anomalies, up to 6 degrees Fahrenheit below normal for the month. So that's pretty large for a monthly anomaly. If we average across the whole state, it was the 19th warmest February on record, so just 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit above that 30-year normal from 1991 to 2020. Precipitation for February was the 20th driest, only 63% of normal precipitation. So that's not something I really like to see for February. There were some areas with above normal precipitation, but unfortunately, much of central Washington was below normal. Next slide, please. This is just a look at March so far. These kind of yellows and light greens in Western Washington are close to near normal. They're within 1 degree Fahrenheit of normal for March so far. But those oranges and reds in Eastern Washington are showing continuation of above normal temperatures. But the precipitation, especially for March, has been mostly less than 70% of normal for really the whole state, almost the whole state for March so far. Next slide, please. This is just a look at the drought monitor. It hasn't really changed much, I don't think, since our last WASAC meeting. It's showing kind of those drier areas for the water year that I just pointed out, and then also representing some of the low snowpack that we'll hear more about. Next slide, and I believe I'm passing it on to Nick now.
Yeah, thank you. And Karen, would it be correct to say that depiction of drought is liable to be kind of changed this week in terms of a little bit more drought in Washington State than that one from last week?
I'm not sure if it changed this week, but I think they're undercounting some of the snowpack deficits a little bit. So I would suspect it to worsen kind of in the coming months, but I'm not confident on what the changes are for this week.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so just dipping our toes in the water, right? It's still warm in the tropical Pacific. Technically, El Nino is still in place, but it's fading. You see some cool waters right along the South American coast. Along our coast, as is typical during El Nino, and as we've seen a lot in the last few years, yeah, the waters are a bit warmer than usual. Go to the next slide. with regards to the tropical Pacific, the El Nino that is definitely on the wane. If you look at the left graphic there, it shows the purple trace shows the evolution of the present event, and in light gray are some of the strong ones in the last 70 years or so. And almost always we go into La Nina after a strong El Nino. The El Ninos have processes associated with them that kind of lead to their own demise. The official probabilities of the future state events are summarized in the bar chart in the lower right, and can see a pretty quick transition, and more likely than not, to La Nina by this summer, and fairly confident that there's going to be La Nina in the fall and upcoming winter. And don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but and that it is what it is. All right, next slide. What I thought might be worth looking at is, you don't want to overinterpret this, but just looking at the last 4 years in which we had a transition from a strong El Nino to La Nina. You can see the years indicated there. And what these are showing are 7-day average runoffs, hydrographs for Washington State as a whole. And the takeaway from this, I would say, is 3 out of the 4 of these past years that are analogous to the present one, the stream flows in summer were down. Not surprising, we have lesser snowpacks typically in El Nino winters. 2010 was kind of the exception there. But for the most part, we get down into the lower, 5 percentile toward the end of summer in these years from strong El Nino to La Nina. But one note of optimism is that it tends to be a fairly quick recovery in the fall with the La Nina. So again, don't want to look too far ahead, but if we can get through the summer, maybe we'll be okay. Next slide. On a kind of shorter term, I haven't shown these in the last couple of meetings, but just looking at the extended 500 millibar height forecasts. These were ones that were finished a couple of days ago. And for week 3 and 4, the outlook is to have higher than normal heights north and west of us. This sort of pattern means that the storm track is probably more to our south than usual. It's not, they're not huge anomalies. And the screaming message is that it doesn't look like it's going to be very active there for over the extended period over the next month or so. We will get some lowland rains and mountain snows, but temperatures, if anything, a little bit on the warm side, and precipitation, there doesn't seem like any miracle in the works for our snowpack. All right, next slide. Just what the models, this is the international multi-model ensemble, are showing for the 500 millibar height anomalies in the upper center, and then the air temperatures and precipitation in the lower left and right, respectively. Higher heights, warmer temperatures, quite a bit of consensus there about the warmer temperatures, not exceedingly so, maybe, something close to 1 degree Celsius. In precipitation, whether you look at the actual anomalies in millimeters, or if you look at it relative to median or percentiles and so forth, not much of a signal there in terms of the April through June precipitation. All right, next slide. And here to get kind of a sense of that, I'm actually going to, out of convenience sake, using the individual models from the National Multi-Model Ensemble to kind of give you an idea that there's quite a diversity in the precipitation forecast for April through June. And in the lower right is the ensemble, the international models that as a whole are showing maybe a little drier along the coast, but not much signal. And that's consistent with the individual models shown, the other thumbnails, in which some are a little bit on the wet side, some are more of them maybe a little bit on the dry side. Overall, just not a big signal in the climate model predictions for this spring coming up. All right, next slide. Looking ahead to summer and temperatures, there is quite a strong consensus, again, looking from an individual model perspective, except for in the lower right. And there, just about everybody and their dog has it warmer than normal, some models more than others. But I think the idea that it's going to be a summer on the warm side relative to 91 2020 norms is a pretty good bet. Next slide. All this is, basically consistent with what the Climate Prediction Center is showing for up top, the temperature and precipitation left and right, and for spring, and at the bottom row for summer, and a pretty strong forecast of or elevated odds of above normal temperatures. Less of a signal there, or higher odds of below normal precipitation. Though those, especially in the summer there, the forecast of below normal precipitation, especially in the northeast part of the state, it reflects what we've seen over the last 15, 20 years, in which just a tendency for drier summers, not so much necessarily what the models themselves are showing, but just, realization of that this is what's happened. We don't necessarily understand exactly why that is, but it's liable to continue. All right, last slide, I think, is just a summary. Like many El Nino winters, above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation for the winter as a whole. Our El Nino is on the way out, and a good bet La Nina on the horizon. No miracles appear to be in the offing in terms of our, really replenishing our snowpack. And I'm fairly confident, quite confident, we're going to be on the warm side, just the climate trends and so forth, along with what the models are showing. Precipitation this spring ahead might be okay, but I agree with the CPC forecast for a dry summer. And with that, we can either have some questions or move on to Matt, I think, is next in line. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Nick and Karen. And we have a few minutes before we jump to Matt. Does anyone have any sort of questions about what Nick and Karen just presented about the data or those models? And we'll jump more into what it means for the hydrologic threshold later on in the meeting, but welcome a few minutes for any questions for Nick and Karen.
Oh, one last thing I might say. I showed the sea surface temperature anomaly mapping in the first slide of my set, and it is warmer than normal temperatures along the coast. The models want to keep it there this summer. We know, especially on the west side of the state, a warmer ocean with the prevailing winds from the west, there's a strong tendency for warmer average temperatures, and especially more warm nights. And so that signaled the local ocean kind of forcing of the weather around here is stronger west of the Cascades than east of the Cascades. But that's another reason to think that it's going to be warmer than normal in the couple of seasons ahead, is that, just what the ocean is doing. It turns out there's not a great deal of influence of those SSTs on our precipitation. Our precipitation depends more on the weather patterns than just what the ocean is doing to the atmospheric boundary layer. So anyway, warm ocean, good for the tuna and not so good for the salmon.
Cool. Thank you, Nick, and for that fish update as well. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
All right. So starting off the chat with this snowpack profile plot, and I'll get into this in the next slide, but generally showing where statewide snowpack is at. And as Nick and Karen both noted, that it's not doing quite well. On record since 1985, this is, let's see, the 5th lowest snowpack on record statewide. And there's one notable thing I want to point out about the profile. So let's take a closer look at it. First off, though, statewide snowpack is at 68% of normal. Last meeting, that number was 64% of normal, so not much change. Percent of median peak snowpack at 68%. So quite a ways from the median peak at this time of year as we approach the normal timing for peak snow accumulation, which we are currently in that period. Days until the median peak statewide is 8 days, and the snowpack percentile is at a measly 10. But let's take a look at a major event that's impacted snowpack across the state this winter and has led to well below normal snowpack at several SNOTEL stations. And that's the midwinter heat wave that occurred in the second half of January. Several sites, mostly in the Cascades and also in the Olympic Peninsula, lost a significant amount of snow water equivalent during that heat wave. And I've picked out just 3 sites noted by stars on the map: Rex River, MF Nooksack near Mount Baker, and Cayuse Pass near Mount Rainier. And we can see this melt-off event that was pretty extreme, and the impact that's had to the snowpack profile. If we take out that melt event, snowpack would either be at or more near normal, of course, than it is now. So this melt event has had a significant impact on the ability for snowpack to recover across much of Washington. And you can see also throughout the winter, really the accumulation season has been dominated by 2 major storm events. There was a storm event in early December, but that had less of an impact on much of Washington. The notable storm impacts were in early January and then in late February into the beginning of March, where we saw significant snow accumulation. Outside of those periods, it's been fairly dry in terms of additional snow, which of course has also had a pretty severe impact on snow conditions across the state. Taking a look at snowpack, the basin and site map on the left is the current map, and on the right is the map from February 27th, which is from last meeting. Just showing the change in conditions, really not much of a change. Snowpack across the state is quite low. There are some stations with near to slightly above normal snowpack near Mount St. Helens and just south of Wenatchee, along the Wenatchee Mountains there. But for the most part, snowpack is well below normal across the state. Taking a look at the snow water equivalent now as percentile, looking at period of record, not the normal period. I just want to show more site rankings than the normal period would show, since a lot of these sites are less than 30 years old. So at least the period of record. And you can see several stations are in a snow drought. So just looking at the D2 severe snow drought, that's when the snowpack or SWE percentile is equal to or less than 10. We can see several stations, notably in the Northern Cascades and the Central Cascades in Washington, sort of reaching that threshold for severe snow drought. Next, taking a look at water year peak SWE, which is no water equivalent, as percent of normal. This time of year, we'd like to see those numbers or those dots green as we approach the normal timing for peak snow accumulation, or at least that medium peak. However, several sites are far behind that median peak value. Red and oranges are generally representative of lower percent values. And there's some greens and one blue in there, marking stations that are at that peak or have reached that peak or exceeded it slightly. But overall, most stations have quite a ways to go. Again, we're already in spring, so the optimism for a significant snowpack recovery is quite low to non-existent at this point, considering more near-term forecasts. Now taking a look at precipitation conditions across the state. On the right is the water year to date precipitation profile plot from October 1st to current. See, generally throughout much of the year, statewide water year to date precipitation has been slightly below to below normal. Water year to date precipitation is at 88% of normal currently. In terms of percentile for the normal period, it's 38. Last meeting, water year to date precipitation was 89%. So again, not much of a change. On the left is showing the water year to date basin and site map for water year to date precipitation. You can see much of the state is below normal, with the exception of some sites in northern, central northern upper Columbia Basin and around Mount St. Helens, and some more near normal precipitation in parts of the northern blues as well for the water year. Now taking a look at month-to-date precipitation, again, both the basin and site map on the left is showing percent of normal values, on the right is showing percentile. And apologize, that smaller map may show up really small if you're just looking at a computer screen, so hopefully you have a larger monitor to look at. But month-to-date precipitation, it's interesting from the map that Karen showed, which I believe was monthly. There's, I think, some discrepancies around the Mount St. Helens area on the Olympic Peninsula, where some of our stations are recording more near normal to above normal monthly precipitation. And I think on the previous map that was showed on the last presentation, that showed more below to well below normal precipitation conditions. So I think that's just interesting to note that potential discrepancy there. But for the majority of the Cascades in Washington, from central up to the northern parts, month to date, precipitation has been quite poor. Parts of the upper Columbia have seen more near normal monthly precipitation. And now looking at compounding precipitation deficits, looking at a 24-month period. On the left is showing the 20-month precipitation normal median departure. And then on the upper right is showing the record lows for 24-month precipitation. And we can start to see some emerging pretty severe precipitation deficits, notably in the central Washington Cascades, in addition to some areas slightly east of the crest in the northern Cascades. So pretty emerging deficits that are pretty significant. And we can see on the median departure map, sort of some more sites that are highlighted and the significant deficits that are starting to show after sort of a relatively dry year so far. Again, the drier conditions are the yellows and oranges. Greens are more near normal. Now taking a look at soil moisture conditions, first looking at some SNOTEL site data, keeping in mind that this is just point data, and then comparing that to a couple of NASA products for soil moisture. First, taking a look at some sites in the Cascades, in addition to a site on the Olympic Peninsula, that site being Buckinghorse, where despite the poor snowpack conditions, soil moisture has been fairly near normal throughout the water year so far. Moving down to the Burnt Mountain Snowtell site here, which is just northwest of Mount Rainier. Soil moisture has not been doing great for much of the year, with soil moisture there breaching period of record lows, and at this point, well below normal. Now taking a look over in the Northern Cascades at the Beaver Pass Snowtell site on the upper right here, you can see soil moisture, again, doing quite poor at this site, reaching new record lows. And it's been in that record low since really the end of December. And at Rainy Pass, which is very near Washington Pass, soil moisture, some dips to below normal, well below normal in February and in mid-March. But now trending more just slightly below normal to within that normal range. Moving on to some sites in eastern Washington, first taking a look at the Salmon Meadow Snowtell site in the upper left, soil moisture there doing fairly well, some recovery at the end of February and into March. Soil moisture there is now near normal. Ragged Mountain, near Spokane, soil moisture there again near normal, doing fairly well for at this time of year. Moses Mountain Snowtell site located here, again doing fairly well. These are sites that have generally received near to above normal precipitation, so that's something to keep in mind. Soil moisture conditions are well above normal at the Moses Mountain site. And at Sourdough Gulch in the Northern Blues, soil moisture there again doing fairly well and is near normal. Now, how do those point data compare to some of these satellite-based products? Keeping in mind that soil moisture, both for the NASA GRACE and the Sportless project products, are computed slightly differently. So first, looking at the GRACE-based root zone soil moisture drought indicator. These are both looking at sort of that soil profile zone from 0 to 100 centimeters. We can see some drier conditions throughout the Cascades, in particular in the northern parts of the Cascades in Washington, and also some drier conditions in the very northeast part in the Pend Oreille Basin in northeastern Washington. A little bit of difference with the Sportless product. We see generally wetter soil moisture conditions in the upper Columbia Basin, more so than the GRACE product. Consistent dry soil conditions for much of the Olympic Peninsula, and pretty consistent, more dry soil moisture conditions with some wetter conditions in the very southeast corner of the state. And that agrees fairly well with the GRACE product. But there seems to be quite a bit of disagreement along the Cascades, and combined with our point data, I think there's more support for drier soil moisture conditions in the central and northern parts of the Cascades than there are wetter soil moisture conditions, given the poor precipitation and the low snowpack there. Next, taking a look at our March 1st water supply forecasts. I realize it's March 27th right now, but our next distribution will be the week of April 1st. So look forward to that. But just taking a quick look at the March 1st, this includes in part some of the storm impacts from that event that took place towards the end of February and into early March. Much of the storm impacts in Washington took place at the end of February, so these forecasts kind of capture that. The map on the left shows % of normal forecast values for the period April through September. And the upper right, that map shows percentile. And it gives, I think, a little bit better view of the forecasts for the summer, where we're seeing particularly low forecasts and where we're seeing a little bit better forecast. So I'm kind of just go off of this percentile map or talk off this real quick. We're seeing fairly low forecasting values for the northern part of the Olympic Peninsula, across the northern Cascades in the Lake Chelan area, and some moderately below normal or moderately low percentiles in the Central Cascades. And the only place we're really seeing near normal forecasts stream flow for April through September is in the very southern parts of Washington, in addition to the singular point in the Upper Columbia Basin. But for the most part, water supply forecasts or summer stream flows for much of Washington are predicted to be more below normal as of March 1st. And it'll be interesting to see how all that changes come the first week in April. And my last slide is the climatic outlook, but that's already been sort of reviewed. So I'm not really going to get into that. All I will say is that there is a smaller storm event that will impact the Pacific Northwest, but pretty minimal snow accumulation in the mountains, maybe up to a foot at higher elevations, and potentially 1.5 feet on the Olympic Peninsula, but don't expect really any significant accumulation or recovery. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And before we switch over to Andy from USGS, Matt, I have one question for you back on some of your earlier SWE maps, comparing the basin maps to some of the individual snowstel sites, and also some of the differences in Oregon and Washington. I was wondering if you could briefly comment on, say, like the maps that show the Walla Walla area, and I'm thinking like this one in particular, and thinking about for Walla Walla, where it brings in some of the better snowpack they're seeing in Oregon. And if you're looking solely at the Washington sites, kind of like if there might be a different picture there.
Yeah, there is snowpack differed quite a bit, Washington versus Oregon this year. We saw a very more of a moisture stream impact Oregon, especially during these storm events and especially during the early December event. And Oregon has received more consistent snow accumulation, despite, again, some melt periods, such as in the later half of January, in addition to a week in March, where it was pretty warm and sunny, even up at high elevations. But overall, the snowpack picture, in the Walla Walla region is faring a little bit better, with snowpack ranging from near normal to slightly below normal. Water year to date precipitation has also, let me switch to that, not been as bad, but it's still pretty poor. And we are seeing signs in the Umatilla Basin of emerging drought conditions. So this is an area of concern for Oregon. But in terms of comparing the Northern Blues region to the rest of Washington, certainly it's faring better than a lot of basins in Washington. But it is interesting, and I should have maybe shown a broader Pacific Northwest picture of the snowpack and precipitation conditions, but it is interesting to see that. But, we're seeing a really dry trend that stretches from the Olympic Peninsula, kind of skirts just north of St. Helens, and dives into a large part of Idaho and into Montana and down into the Bighorns in Wyoming. So there's a whole, swath of west that hasn't really received significant moisture throughout the winter. But sort of below that trend line, we are seeing a lot better snowpack conditions. So Washington just missed this year.
Yeah, Andy Long with the USGS Washington Water Science Center. Nick prepared these slides, so you can go ahead to the next slide. Stream flow for the state, the 7 days as of March 26th. And on the western side, we have a mix of below normal to normal and above normal. The closer you get into the mountains, the more the light blue on the western side. And on the eastern side of the mountains, a lot of much above normal up in the northeastern part of the mountains there. And then out on the Columbia Plateau, a mix of a lot of normal and a few below normal. Okay, next. This is index gauging stations that apparently we've been using for years here to look at across the state, just to track things over time. I mentioned to Nick that in the Walla Walla Basin, there's a lot of diversions for agriculture. So there's a question as to whether this is a good index station that, that shows natural or near natural stream flow. But it's been going on for a long time, so it's still, something to compare historically. Okay. And for those same index gauges, most of them are running normal right now for the last 7 days. And then the American River near Nile is much above normal. And Hangman Creek at Spokane below normal. Might be a lag here, I'm waiting for it. So still on the 7-day average stream flow, this is for the whole state. Shows the percentage of stream gauges that are in the normal range or below normal or above normal. And so on the far left is February, and then on the right side of that plot is March. And we are have increased the number of range. Okay, fewer gauges in the below normal and much below normal. And not a lot of change as far as the above normal. And then on the right side, the red line just shows the average stream flow index being above normal starting in early February, and going to below normal later in February, coming back up to above normal and going into March, and then it's been close to normal since then. All right, next. And monthly average stream flow. So this is, so on the left is February 2024, and then the right side is March 2024. And so for February, it was drier. It's the overall, particularly on the eastern side. And so next slide. Now, if we look at just March for 2024 on the top versus 2021, 2022, and 23, 2021 was drier overall a bit. 2022 is wetter, so it was wetter in 2022, and 2023 was much drier, so a lot of red and yellow. And so I'll just mention that the bright red is the low, the record low for the period of record. Okay, next. This plot is similar to plots that Nick Bond was with these. The green is the historic or historic normal conditions of stream flow. This is the as far as the 7-day average for the whole state. So it's all stream gauges in the state. And the heavy black line is the current October of 2023. And so it's been up and down, a bit into the above normal and below normal ranges, but mostly in the normal range compared to historic conditions up through about May last year, and then it dropped down in summer and fall of 2023 to the range of much below normal. And then it came back up into the normal range since then, mostly. Okay, next. And so Nick Bond also presented these comparison plots, except for different years. And I'm not sure why Nick Sutphin chose these years, but we'll look at them. These are some different years and don't go as far back as what Nick Bond presented, I think. 1, that's water year. A lot below normal and well below normal for that year. 2005 was in the normal range to some up in the higher ranges and lower ranges. 2015. Let's see. So someone's got a comment. 2001, 5, 15, and 19 were drought. Okay. Nick was picking the drought years. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. So these are the drought years. That's why we're seeing the tends to be in the drier range compared to historic. And then 2024, you've seen that. So that we're back in generally normal range. Okay, thanks for those comments. Next slide. So cumulative 2023 and 2024, these are water years. And the green band, the normal conditions. Blue is highest observed cumulative, which was 1934. And then the yellow orange color runoff, which was in 2001, and compared to the black line, which is the 2023 and 2024 conditions. So in 2023 was in the lower part of that normal range for the first part, and then now in the normal range to the lower half of the normal range. And then 2024, we're pretty much right there, right in the middle of the normal range now, and right at the cumulative daily median. Okay, next. These are 3 reference groundwater wells. I think you've seen these before, that these have been presented on in the past. And so the orange color is where depth to water is 0 to 50 feet. So these are mostly in the 0 to 50 feet depth to water range. And then the one over near Spokane is a deeper water level. Okay, next. And these are those 3 wells, Scatter Creek on the west, Davenport on the east, and then the Whetstone well in the sort of central, southern, eastern area. So monthly conditions, monthly summaries. And the green, the colors are the historic conditions, historic stats, with green being the normal again. And the red is the current conditions. So for Scatter Creek, pretty much right in the middle of the normal range and the monthly median. For Davenport, we're very low. So groundwater levels are very low this year since at least since April of last year. So that's a little concerning. Stonewell, it's right near the median, right in the normal conditions range. Okay, next. So the same three wells. First is the Scatter Creek well, a little summary of this year compared to last year. So or the previous year. 12 months is the blue line. So the dark blue line is the last 12 months. And then the brown line is the previous year. So we're, first part of that 12 months, we're lower. We've gone from lower than previous, and now we're previous for those water levels. And then the gray dashed dotted line is the median for 2004 and 2004 to 2023. Okay, so the longer term median. The green part data, and the blue solid line at the bottom shows the area for provisional data subject to change. Okay, next. Same well, Scatter Creek well, just a longer term hydrograph. So we're just comparing that, to the current conditions to, since, and so we're up, pretty high, close to the, the peaks that occurred in 2021 and 2022, higher than the peaks that occurred in 2023. So pretty good there. Next slide. Over on the east side near Spokane. Again, the blue line is the current year, the last 12 months, and for water levels. And the brown is the previous 12 months. So pretty similar with some recent changes, but recently we're higher than in the previous spring. And then, but both of those years are well below the median for 2004 to 2023. All right, next. And okay, Davenport well, long range since and so we're quite low compared to the highs of 2017 and 2018. Next. So Whetstone well, blue line is the last 12 months, brown line is the previous 12 months. And so some differences there, from the first 12 months to the second 12 months, but right now we're right about at what occurred in the previous 12 months in the previous spring, and very close to the long-term median. All right, next. So compared to current conditions for the same well back through 2017, we're much lower than some of the previous peaks, but not far from the long-term median. Okay, next. So last slide to summarize, let's see, 7-day average stream flow at 8 index gauging stations. For stream gauging, normal is North Fork, Nooksack, Chehalis, your Grand Mound, Walla Walla River, EF Lewis River, East Fork Lewis River, Quinault River, below normal Hangman Creek, much above normal American River. Let's see here. So statewide monthly average stream flow is normal overall. Cumulative runoff is normal. For groundwater conditions, normal range for Scatter Creek and Whetstone, and below normal for Davenport over by Spokane. And I think that's all my slides.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Fox. I'm the service hydrologist at the Spokane National Weather Service office, and I am filling in for Amy Burke, who is away today, and she's at the Northwest River Forecast Center. So she provided me a template, so I've updated it from what was presented last month. So here are the charts that show the runoff that we've seen from October till now versus the water supply forecast from the River Forecast Center. So the image on the left is the current runoff that we've seen. We see lots of yellows and greens across the state. There are some areas that are a little more elevated, above 100%, and those would be primarily in the Methow River Valley and parts of Northeast Washington, but for the most part, right near normal to below normal statewide. Now, if we look at the image that is on the right, that is the water supply forecast, and this was the one that was updated just yesterday. Keep in mind the River Forecast Center updates their water supply forecast every day based on the forecasts of precipitation and temperatures that we're looking at for the next 10 days. So we see a lot of yellows in the water supply forecast on both sides of the state, and also some areas that are in the orange, and those are the very low areas that are across parts of north central Washington, along with some other lower levels that are down in southeast Washington. Okay, so here's another view of the water supply forecast that is on the left, just like the image we saw on the previous slide. But the one on the right is the percentiles of the water supply forecast, which is similar to what Matt was showing. Those percentiles are really good in identifying what areas are below normal, that has been normalized over the last several decades. And we can see some areas that are down in less the 20th percentile, and some of them even in the under 10 percentile for low levels across parts of the Northern Cascades, including parts of the Skagit River Valley, the Wenatchee, and also near Stehekin. Right, this next slide shows little bit more view of precipitation and temperatures, and I know we have covered that throughout this presentation. This is just another view of it across the entire river forecast basin that they're forecast for. And we see how for precipitation through January and February, there were some deficits, especially across the Northern Cascades, and even more so as we are looking at for the last month, for pretty much most of March, it's been on the drier side with deficits in most areas. Taking a look at the bottom row, those are the temperatures and how they've parted from normal, highlighting how cool it was in January, which was pretty much the anomaly. If we look back over the last several months, temperatures for the most part have been near to above normal, and that has been the case as we've seen in February and so far in March. Another thing I want to point out on is with this chart that is over here on the right is the water year precipitation, seasonal precipitation, and we see those deficits in precipitation that is highlighted across north central Washington near the Cascades. Just want to reflect again, snowpack. That is also another element that are incorporated into the river forecast. And I know this was covered at length by different presenters, but just want to highlight how it has been below normal statewide. And as we went through that warm spell through March, we saw a lot of that snowpack being eaten away, especially at those mid-slope elevations. Okay, so here is a chart that shows the natural runoff for the water year to date, and shows the percentages at various forecast points across the state. The column that is in gray is what the values are, and the column that is highlighted in orange has been the change since the last time we met back in February. And overall, the runoff has been, the changes have been pretty minimal, less than 10%. Was some areas that have gone down a bit on the Dungeness near Squim, but for the most part, we've seen the runoff maybe a couple percentage points higher than we've seen in the last month. And keep in mind, we didn't have much in the way of precipitation over the last 30 days. So this chart shows the national water supply forecast and the changes that we have seen up to yesterday when I grabbed these images, and the various forecast points with the values, percent of normal highlighted in gray, and then the changes since the last meeting that are highlighted in orange. And for the most part, these values have shown a decrease of 5% to up to 16% or more. We've seen some of those decreases in water supply, especially on the west side, on the Dungeness near Squim, and also across southeast Washington on the Walla Walla near Touche, which also is about 16% lower than we saw last year. Last month, excuse me. So definitely a decrease in the water supply that we've seen in the last month. So we're looking ahead and looking at what those river forecasts are going to be doing in the next 10 days. And we incorporate the temperature and the precipitation forecast. Here is the next 10 days of precipitation, starting with today with the light rain and high mountain snow we're going to be seeing over the next 24 hours. We're also going to be seeing several more rounds of light precipitation, but overall, not much that's going to bring those amounts above normal. In fact, that middle image shows the departure from normal over the next 10 days of precipitation. So yes, even though we're going to be seeing some wet weather, it's not going to be enough to boost those amounts to what we normally should be seeing for late March into early April, especially on the west side and across the higher elevations. And here is just the breakdown of little snapshots of each of the next 10 days, showing the precipitation forecasts, the maximum and minimum temperatures, and the snow levels that we are looking at through what's being incorporated into these river forecasts. So we can see some wet weather over the next 24 to 36 hours, and then again later in the period, another round of light precipitation. But there are some mild and warm conditions that we're going to be seeing as well. So some key takeaways I wanted to cover. Yes, our snowpack remains below normal in most areas. Precipitation has been below normal in the last 30 days in most areas. And taking a look at that water year precipitation, we really see those deficits taking place across the Northern Cascades. The runoff has shown little change over the last month, and water supply forecasts still remain near to below normal, with a slight decrease seen in the last 30 days. So that's what I have for my slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have.
Okay, so that's a picture of Rimrock Reservoir. It's down low and it was covered with snow and ice. I took that about a month ago. Okay, this is a graph of the temperature. Hopefully you can see my mouse, but the temperature range up here on the top of the graph.
Hey, Chris, it's not advancing. There we
And-
go.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm afraid it might be just a little slow. Okay, so the dark blue is the range of the temperatures on the low end and the high end. And you can see that in March, typically we've been near to above average, especially in the latter half of the month. So it's been kind of warm. We also, if you look down here at the graph, in the lower half, it's the precipitation accumulation through the water year. And the mid part of March was rather dry here in the valley. And then we got a pretty good shot of rain last week and got us back up to average. So we've been kind of jumping up and down above and below average. Right now we're about right near average. Okay, now this graph, we only update at the ends of the months, and we're not quite at the end of March, but you can see the distribution of the monthly precipitation through the water year so far. We've had 3 dry months and 2 decent months. December and January were decent. And we had only about 76% of average in, it's funny, I can hear some background noise. Maybe it's Robin. There you go. Thanks, Robin. Okay, so 76% of average. And then it looks like right now, to date, we have about 45% of average for March. And that's dropped us from the water year down to about 84% of average. The snow water equivalent at the beginning of the month was not great. It was 77% of average. And I'm going to show you the maps for the subbasins in the Yakima, the upper Yakima, the Natchez, and the lower Yakima. At the beginning of the month, they were 84%, 78%, and 61% respectively. And now we are at 76%, 74, and 58. So you can see we've dropped between about 5 to 6% of average. I feel kind of fortunate that we haven't dropped more than that because it hasn't been a real robust month as far as snow goes. But at the beginning and recently we had some okay snow. Okay, looking forward, we like to, of course, as many do, like to look at years that are similar. So what this is showing is that we have quite the spread, even for years that were close to the values we have this year. And I'm just, in this case, looking at the upper Yakima. You can see that if we turn out like 2022, we could recover and have a really good water year. Whereas if we end up like 1992 and sort of peter out and melt out early, it could be very bad for the water supply. We, of course, are thinking we'll end up somewhere here in the middle. We have 2003 and 1993 that are good examples, and 2019. A flow in the Yakima River like we saw with USGS and with the River Forecast Center, the National Weather Service, running about 80% of average through February and close to that still. We did get some, you can see that in March we had some above that. Well, recently we've had a warmer rain on snow event that perked the flows up, and we've been up there for about a week or more. Okay, that has helped our reservoirs, Phil. You can see the trajectory of our reservoirs change. So we're filling more steeply in the past week and a half or so. And currently, this is the March 1st forecast, because I borrowed this presentation from that, and we update that again at the beginning of the month. But right now we're at 475,000 acre feet, which is, I believe, I have it in my summary, but I think it was 68% of average. So that has improved. So there's a bit of a trade-off when we see the melt-off occurring in March, but we can capture some of that. Some of it goes on out of the basin as a natural flow. Now I'm reviewing here our forecasts. Sorry for all the numbers and columns and names, but this first row here under the title row is the Yakima River near Parker, and it's the one that defines our overall basin water supply and what our irrigation districts will receive. It's what goes into that, along with our reservoir storage and such. But at the beginning of the month, the forecast was right around 90%. Our sub-basins were generally around 90% of average at the beginning of March. And then, of course, we do a low end and a high end and run that through our total water supply available calculation. And this is our total water supply calculation. Again, lots of rows and columns and numbers, but you can focus on this adopted. Hopefully you're seeing the updated. Is it updating okay, Caroline?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is the adopted right here, and this is the runoff forecast. Then we account for return flows, and right now, since we're going to be in a shortage situation, we're estimating a low end on the runoff on the return flows, and this is what we expect for reservoir storage at the end of the month. And right now we are at 475, so it didn't do too badly estimating my April 1st storage. And then this number, 2.46 million acre feet, is the total water supply available for needs downstream. We have to take away from that the ending storage in the reservoir system and the flow that will go on out of the basin without being used by irrigation. And then we look at the water rights, and we come down and we see that our junior water rights would have received 72% of average if it were implemented at the time. Of course, that won't happen until we have maxed out our reservoirs wherever they will max out. We don't expect them to fill this year, but anyway, 72%, that'll be activated later in the year when we're on what we call storage control, and we actively control the flows in the river with our reservoirs. At the time, we were anticipating a mid-level pulse flows for our fish. And yeah, let me move on here. This is sorry for so many points, bullet points on my summary, but I added a few to bring it up to date. We were actually at 405 excuse me. Sorry about that. So on, anyway, March 26th, we're at 475, 69% of average, and that's 45% full. So we're not even half full yet. We do hope we can capture a lot of water during the spring, but we do not expect 3 of our reservoirs to fill pretty much at all. I mean, we don't have any much of an expectation. There's a slim chance that Cle Elum could fill, but it's not likely. Ketchlis and Cochise probably won't. Rimrock could possibly fill. Bumping should fill. Okay. February precipitation was 75%. March to date is 46. Runoff forecast, we're near 90%. We did do an early bird for our irrigation districts because they have some deadlines they have to meet. So I just did that yesterday, and it looks like we'll probably end up in the mid 80% range for our forecast, maybe lower. But per rationing at the beginning of the month, like I said, was 72%. Our early bird is showing it to drop into the 60% range somewhere. So we are expecting our per rationing to drop with our next forecast. The Tidal 12 flow is on the low end. The BA pulse flows will be determined because when it's below 70%, it's a little more subjective. And this is just some other water that's available for fish there at the bottom of 22,000 acre feet. That's it for the presentation. And again, our official update is April 6th. So hopefully you can tune in for that. That's almost a week away, or a little over a week away.